What's up, good people? And we are back to the Quality Talk Show. It's your boy T-Word with my co-host Quentin Dame Lilly. What's good, Dame?
Yo, what up? What's good, man? How y'all doing out there?
You know,
right?
You know how we do it in here, good
sure.
people.
For sure.
You know, we about to get this show popping. We about to get it rocking. A lot of NBA action, a lot of basketball action get into.
Man.
So, you know, my co-host here. For sure.
First love.
My co-host here, you know, he gonna get deep into it, give you that in-depth analysis of different things. And, you know, I'm gonna give you that fan's eye, that outside critique of how things are going. So without further delay, we're gonna jump right into it and get into the biggest news in the NBA right now.
No doubt.
In my opinion, the injury to Mr. Kevin Durant.
Yep.
Man, that is huge. That is huge. Rest of the regular season minimum. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So, Q, this is going to have a ripple effect. And I know we're just a couple days out from the injury, but the ripples can already be felt.
Yep.
So, we're going to start with the Warriors in particular. In your opinion, how does this particular injury affect the way that team is going to work? Because up to this point, with Durant, this team is the favorite to win the West, and you could pencil them in for the finals without hesitation.
Pretty much.
So now that Durant is out of the fold for the rest of this season, how do you see this playing out in Golden State, bro?
You know, I mean, I think it's just interesting when you look at the last 3 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you look at the great boxing matchups of history, right? Mm-hmm. The best ones are 3 matches, right? The best ones are the first round, the second time, and the third time. And the third time is always the grudge match that settles the score when there's a split in the first 2.
Right.
And that's what everybody was looking forward to coming into this NBA season. They were looking forward to a Cavs Warriors trilogy. Like, that would have blown away the TV ratings for the NBA Finals. I mean, it just would have.
Yeah.
You have the dynamic of, you know, the biggest comeback in NBA Finals history last year with the Cavs coming back from 3-1.
True that.
You have the dynamic of Kevin Durant leaving OKC after they had a 3-1 lead against the same team that lost a 3-1 lead last year. He joins them, makes the super team, and the very first ever 4-headed monster on an NBA team. Right. I think the only other team that might have been able to say they had somewhat of that would have been the mid-'90s, late '90s Rockets, in which they had Charles Barkley, Scottie Pippen, Clyde Drexler, and Hakeem Olajuwon. Now, all of those guys are a little bit older, so that's why they may sometimes not get the notoriety and the recognition that people think of when they think of super teams, because most people think the first super team was the '08 Boston Celtics. But if you want to be real about it, they actually were the first super team that joined together as free agents. I'm not talking about teams that drafted their own players. I'm talking about guys that decided to join together to try to win a championship.
I mean, just a side point on that. That's nearly an Olympic roster right
there. No doubt. That's almost an Olympic starting lineup.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Except for the fact that Olajuwon is not from America. But nonetheless, he would have made the team if he was.
The quality of player. So you're right. But again, more to your point, with Durant joining, and everybody was looking at like, wow, okay, so a super team went and got souped up. So they took a superstar or at least a star player, Harrison Barnes, they let him go. And you bring in Kevin Durant, and it's like, wow, so you didn't just like reload, like you put in the extendo clip.
Yep. And the one thing that I think is going to be even more highlighted now when you ask me essentially what this means for the Warriors, we have to look back at what the Warriors were and what their strength was over the last 3 years.
Right.
Their motto, they had T-shirts made during the playoffs. You know what those T-shirts said? Strength in numbers.
Right.
Strength in numbers.
We're going to be deep.
We're going to outrun you. We're going to have more depth in you. We're going to have more quality depth, more guys to come in off the bench fresh when your guys are getting tired.
No doubt.
They had to give up that depth to get Kevin.
To get KD, yeah.
They lost all 3 of their bigs when we talk about Festus Ezeli, Andrew Bogut, who we're going to mention a little bit later, as well as Maurice Spates. All 3 of those guys are gone. So they lost their size, right? They lost their bench scoring that they got in their leading scorer off the bench in Leandro Barbosa. That's one of the underrated losses for this team that I don't think a whole lot of people are realizing. Leandro Barbosa was the leading scorer off the bench. Not Andre Iguodala, not Sean Livingston, Leandro Barbosa. And what he did was he was able to continue to keep space on the floor and play that up and down style. People forget Leandro Barbosa was one of the original small ball players on the mid-2000s Phoenix Suns team with Steve Nash and Mike D'Antoni. They invented that shoot in 6 seconds or less system that the Warriors are using a lot more frequently now, just with more talented players. So what ultimately I think that this means for the Warriors is that we're going to find out how good Steph, Clay, and Draymond can be having to play more minutes, having to not be able to rely on a consistent bench, and not have more than one guy who can create his own shot. Because remember, when you have more than one guy on a team that can create their own shot, you can keep one of those guys constantly in the game to create offense for others.
Right.
And the only person on that team right now that can create offense for others is Steph.
Yeah.
He can create his own shot, and he can create for others. While people know that Draymond is the leading assist man on this team, he's not necessarily a guy who you would rely on to create his own shot first to open up shots for others. Usually when he drives, he's looking to pass off, and people can key on that now. Now they go back to being the same team they were last year without a bench, which I think is the biggest advantage they had, was to continue to run that speed at you all game long. So for them, I think it's going to be extremely difficult, and I think it's going to be interesting to see, because in the last 3 games, since the game that Kevin Durant has gotten hurt, Steph and Clay are both struggling from 3. Combined in the last 3 games, they've only made 7 threes.
Well, you obviously can defend those guys differently without that weapon on the court. So that instant impact of losing a superstar player, a top 5 player in the league, that's huge on any team. I don't care if you're a super team or not. You lost, let me see, I've got the numbers right here. 25.3 points a game is what KD was averaging.
It's hard to make that up.
It's
hard to
near
make
impossible.
up for that with other players.
Right, because that's 25.3 points by committee. You're not going to bring in one dude to do that.
No, there's not one guy on their team, or else he wouldn't be on that team. He wouldn't be coming off the bench.
He wouldn't find a way to he wouldn't be a free agent available to you. So you're making a great point there. So let's expand that a little bit more. And here's my opinion on how this impacts the West. Right. Because, I'm going to look at it from I'm going to look at the forest. I'm not going to look at that one tree because I feel like Golden State has the right coaching and the right roster to work it out and figure it out. There's enough games left to figure it out. But for the West, guess what? Teams that were kind of like, ooh, I'm not looking forward to it. Uh-oh.
Right.
All of a sudden, those Texas boys is coming.
Yeah.
San Antonio's looking like, all right.
Yep.
And y'all don't have what y'all need if we get in a dogfight to beat us.
No doubt.
And then Houston is like, oh, we can gun with you now. Yeah. And I feel like, while I feel like San Antonio has the highest probability winning head-to-head, if necessary, I believe that Houston has that X factor. Wow. I feel like James Harden got it on his back, man. And my gut is telling me, keep your eye on Houston and watch them make a run, because now they have this renewed vigor to try.
No doubt.
Because that armor has a chink in it now.
Yeah, it does. It's bigger than a chink. It's a big piece missing now.
So the armor's dented.
It's a big piece.
The armor's dented.
Essentially, that soldier don't have a helmet on no more.
Right.
He don't have a helmet on no more. He got his armor, but he don't have a helmet on.
Or he at least missing the shin guards. And I don't know if you've been hitting the shin, but it ain't no joke. But that being said, I really do feel like the West opened up in a major way.
Of course.
And I feel like Houston is the greatest beneficiary, but that's just my personal opinion. What do you think, bro?
No, I mean, I think it really just all ultimately depends on how Kevin Durant responds from this injury. We're talking about a sprained ligament and bone bruising. I've had bone bruising twice in my career. I was out an entire year from it. Not to say that his is the same as mine, not to say that he can't take it like I could, but realistically, bone bruising is one of those tricky things that a doctor can't tell you the bone bruising will be away and it'll go away in 2 months, it'll go away in a month, it'll go away in 6 weeks. It heals when it heals. It's not something that you can speed up or expedite the process of. And it's not something that you can necessarily rehab. It's just something that you kind of have to deal with.
It's a time thing.
And you have to be able to either deal with the pain or not be able to deal with the pain. And it's one of those things that I think for an athlete like him, who requires using his athleticism, using his agility, using his stop and start speed to get up and down the floor to be effective, I think that would be extremely difficult for him to get over until that injury is fully healed. And then once it gets fully healed, now we're talking about the team having been a month or maybe 2 months without him, being used to him not being there, and then trying to integrate him back into the team probably during the playoffs, which is a difficult time to be trying to adjust when all the cards is on the table, all the marbles is in. You know what I mean? So I definitely think that while I wouldn't say that their fate is sealed for this season, I think that their chances have been diminished. And I think that it's going to allow these other teams, like you mentioned, San Antonio, who I thought had a good shot to beat them even with Kevin Durant. As well as the Houston Rockets, who I didn't think had a good shot, but now I think they do, to be able to gun back and forth in that kind of a game. Because I would be very, very interested to see how Klay Thompson or Andre Iguodala or whoever would be guarding James Harden would be able to respond to the way that he plays, the speed and the connection that he has with all of his teammates. Not to mention, like we said last week, they added Lou Williams, who's going to be a great piece for them. He's already played well since he's been with that team. He seemed to fit in seamlessly. Plus, they already had one of the leading scorers off the bench in Eric Gordon. So now their bench is better than the Warriors. And then you could honestly argue who has the best player in that series. Is it Steph or is it James Harden? Because if you want to talk about to this year,
that's Harden.
It's arguing that you could say it's James Harden. And you see what had happened with the Cavaliers last year. When you have the best player on the court, you always have a shot.
It shifts.
You always have a shot. So ultimately, I think that it's going to come down to how much Kevin Durant can respond, how well he can play when he does come back, and also not only that, but when he comes back.
That's a good point there. So just for the people out there that hadn't been keeping up with that, so with Kevin Durant out, the Warriors did go ahead and sign Matt Barnes. He's not going to give you the type of production, but he will integrate into that team really well. But with that, we've discussed already the impact of his injury on his team and the conference that his team is in, because the next phase of this conversation, if they can't take care of business in-house, in their conference, then they won't even get to the finals. But let's project that far and look at the other side of the league, the Eastern Conference. And number one, we're going to talk about how KD's injury impacts how the rest of the league is going to approach. Who are we going to see in the finals now? But also, the Cavs didn't sit on their hands. They didn't do anything in free agency.
No, they didn't.
But they did pick up Andrew Bogut.
Moves under the table.
And Deron Williams. And this is why sometimes I look at the league crazy.
Along with trading for Kyle Korver a couple of weeks ago. Who's going to be a big pickup for them as well.
Absolutely. So what you did is, old King James said, hey, man, we got to get this thing together if we want to get back to the chip. They didn't do it in free agency, but or not free agency, but before the trade deadline, specifically addressing certain needs, but now they have. Some people will have question marks about Deron Williams. Bogut, we know what we're getting out of this guy. Okay, so you've got these players on your roster. You filled all the holes that were perceived up to this point. KD's down. The Warriors look vulnerable. If you're Cleveland, are you now maybe eyeing San Antonio and figuring out how you can match up with them? Because I feel like some of the Cleveland moves were to, okay, we need to get ready for Golden State. Now, will these same moves be beneficial against Houston if you happen to see them? San Antonio, what you got, bro?
You know, I think that it's a funny situation in which the moves that they are making to be able to combat against the Warriors are the same moves that can help them to beat the Spurs. And
how so?
I think that most people wouldn't be able to make that connection right away because those are two drastically different teams.
It definitely went over my head.
Drastically, just different
play styles. Yeah.
Well, you have to remember, before they got Andrew Bogut, Tristan Thompson was their only true big who played defense. The only one. He was the only one who played defense and rebounded and did the hustle things, the little things that you needed from a center or a power forward position. The rest of their power forwards and centers were scorers, shooters, and finesse players. Speaking about Kevin Love and about Channing Frye.
Right.
They go out and they get Andrew Bogut. that's going to help them against the Warriors, because the thing that the Warriors have consistently struggled with when playing the Cavs is offensive rebounding. Mm-hmm. Andrew Bogut is a great offensive rebounder. He's also a tough guy that can protect the rim. And what people don't realize is that while the Warriors are a great shooting team, they play so well at getting into the paint and then drawing your defense in and then kicking it back out for threes.
Right.
And that's how they get open. It's not necessarily that they just pass it around the perimeter and shoot.
Right.
A lot of times it's predicated on getting the ball to the basket, getting the defense to
penetrate and dish,
and then they kick it out for threes. Well, with Bogut in there, you don't have to give as much help from your wings, because you would rather Steph shoot over an extended 7-footer's arms than you would him having to be able to kick it out to wide open shooters, or vice versa from someone else who's driving to kick it to Steph. So that move helps them against the Warriors. It also helps them against the Spurs. The Spurs have legitimately right now 3 bigs who can score, rebound, and pass. And what do you need to be able to beat that kind of a team? You need bigs that can play defense. And before they got Andrew Bogut, they only had Tristan Thompson, who was really doing that on a consistent basis. So now when the Spurs want to go with Gasol and Aldridge in at the same time, or David Lee and Gasol, or Gasol and David Lee, they can go ahead and play Andrew Bogut in with Tristan Thompson to match up against that size from a defensive perspective. So I think that same move of getting Andrew Bogut is going to help them against the Warriors to attack their weakness even more. It's also going to help the Cavaliers' defense in a game in which they may have to play against the Spurs to be able to help with defensive rebounding, to be able to help to defend those guys on the post, because that's what the Spurs are going to do. They're going to give their big guys the ball. Right. Gasol is one of their leading scorers. David Lee has been coming on as of late. And LaMarcus Aldridge was one of the biggest pickups of 2 years ago when he went to the Spurs. And he's played very well since he's got there. He's fit in just like a glove.
Hook him.
No doubt, of course. He had to get his plug in. Yeah. But then when we talk about the addition of Darren Williams, what that helps to do is, I think that helps to allow LeBron the rest of this season, if not anything. I think it allows him to be able to get the rest that's needed. Most of this season, when Kyrie Irving has been out of these games, LeBron has had to play backup point guard. Yeah. Because Kay Felder, their second-round pick who they drafted, he just hasn't come along like maybe they would have hoped this year. It's not to say that he won't, because I think he's a very young guy, but he's not that kind of guy you can rely on in the playoffs
right now. Yeah.
When the lead is 8, keep it at 8. Yeah. In a playoff game. I don't think that he's the player that the Cavs can look to say he will stem the tide. He will at least keep this lead where it's at until we can get our starters back in the game.
There's no one who gives LeBron that comfort level to say, if all of us have a seat together, if we're up 10, we come back in, we're up 8. Right. Or at least 6. Right. He knows we go out, we might be down 4 when I get back on the floor. So, yeah, what you're saying is a very valid point.
And definitely. I think that Darren Williams supplies that trust factor. Right. He's played in the Olympics with LeBron twice before. He's proven himself to be a multi-time All-Star, a former max player, contract player. So he's proven that he knows what he's doing out on the court, and he doesn't have to do it for very, very long. Right. Because Kyrie is going to get at least 35 minutes a game, and in some games he's going to play 40. So really what you're asking Darren Williams to do, unless they start to play them more together, which I think is an option.
That's probably going to happen.
They could be an option in certain matchups against certain teams. You can play them both in the same game together. But for the most part, you're really only going to be asking Darren Williams to play anywhere from 18 to 12 minutes a game. To be out there, to stem the tide, to be leadership, to make open shots.
Hold the lead.
And just stem the tide. Don't let it become something that we're making it worse than what it was.
Facilitate scoring and don't fall behind.
Exactly. That's so those two moves, I think, are key. LeBron mentioned them in January when he was being criticized for being a complainer and a whiner by Charles Barkley, by Skip Bayless, by all of these commentators who wanted to say that, he wanted another superstar. No, that's not what he said. What he said is, I'd like a backup big, so if Tristan comes out, we can have somebody to protect the rim, and I'd like to have a backup point guard. So when Kyrie goes out of the game, I don't have to do it all the time. Right. He got exactly that. I think they're better for it.
No doubt. So, good people, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. That's going to wrap this segment. We're going to get back on. We got a new special segment coming up. It's called Right on Cue. That's going to be my boy Quentin Dame Lilly with his own personal segment. He going to get in your ear real quick with whatever particular topic he wants to talk about. I mean, if Stephen A can get his own segment and Max Kellerman can get his own segment, my boy Q got something to say. So when we come back from the break, we'll be right back right on Q. Y'all hold it down.
Y'all stay tuned. All right, now welcome back to the Quality Talk Show. You getting my segment, my personal segment. We trying something new, something fresh for you guys. This segment is going to be called Right on Q. You guys can follow me on Instagram as well as on Twitter at that same handle. But this is going to be a little bit of a segment in which I give you guys my take personally on something and give you guys a little bit of background about my experience with having gone through it. Over the last couple of weeks, LeVar Ball, who is Lonzo Ball's father, the assumed number 1 draft pick for the NBA draft this coming school year, plays at UCLA. Freshman phenom, been playing very, very well for UCLA this year. Has him back in the top 10 and back in title contention. His father has been very, very vocal and very overtly confident in his son's abilities. And while Lonzo Ball has proven himself, I think, to be one of the best college basketball players, I think his father has taken a step in the wrong direction that may hurt his son going forward. So I want to start by telling you a little bit about a story that I know much, much well about. A lot of guys in the NBA and a lot of guys in professional sports come from one-parent homes. They come from struggling economic backgrounds, and they come from places of poverty in which the only option they had was to play sports to be able to better a life for themselves as well as the ones that they loved in their family. Lonzo Ball is not from that kind of an environment. Lonzo Ball is the oldest of 3 brothers. He also has 2 younger brothers who are high school phenoms as well. His parents are obviously raising him and his brothers very, very positively and in a good home. I think that sometimes that can hurt you, though, when you have a father like him who can be somewhat overbearing. It's a difficult situation to be in as a son when you already have a lot of pressure on you because you are the perceived number 1 pick. You know, the hometown team, the Lakers, are a team that is going to probably have a top 3 pick and is projected to pick you if you do fall to their spot. For your father to say things like, oh, well, you know, we hope that Nike and Adidas are ready. When he says things like, he's better than Steph Curry. We're talking about Steph Curry, the NBA player, who's proven himself to be one of the best shooters of all time. Not just today, but all time. So for his father to jump to that kind of a conclusion, I think it's somewhat irresponsible on his part. And I think it also does a disservice to Lonzo Ball because, I mean, I've been that kind of a player before in that situation where my dad had a large role in my development as a player. And one of the things that my father did when I got to be in high school was he began to take a step back. He began to let my game speak for itself, and he began to let me speak for himself. None of this is stuff that Lonzo has said. All of this is stuff that LeVar, his father, has done. And I think that, like I said, it's becoming a disservice not only to him, but also to his perception of himself, Lonzo I'm talking about, as well as his brothers, because you have to remember, LeVar is setting a standard that only Lonzo to this point in college has lived up to. He hasn't lived up to it in the NBA, and his brothers haven't lived up to it in college yet. And that's just lighting the fire. John Wall of the Washington Wizards last week said, oh yeah, we're going to bust him up when he get to the NBA because he thinks he's this, and that. He think he can just come in and just do whatever he wants. Well, a lot of it is not necessarily him, but it's his father. And it's a hard situation, I think, for a young man to be in which you want to respect your father's wishes. You want to show that you appreciate what your father is doing for you. But it's one of those situations in which I think that sometimes you have to just say, hey, Pop, you ain't helping me out here. You really not helping me out. And if I was his son, that would be one of the things that I would try to convey to my dad is that while I appreciate your support and your confidence in me, let's keep that in-house. Let you tell me that you believe in me in that kind of a manner. Because all that's doing is raising the stakes and then putting more and more pressure on him to live up to when he already is under a tremendous amount of pressure already. Everybody knew that he was going to be good. Everybody knew that he was going to be a top player in college, and everybody figures that he'll be a top draft pick if he does come out this season. So I don't think it's really going to be able to help his brand at all, and I don't think it's really going to be able to be a positive influence on his younger brothers. Spinning this into his younger brothers, his youngest brother, LaMelo Ball, a couple of weeks ago, had 92 points in a high school game. Yeah, 92 points. I know that that's hard to believe, but it happened. I saw the videotape. It looked like they may have rewinded it because it seemed like some of the same shots he kept hitting over and over and over, but they were at different points of the game. And one of the things that was unique in the criticism of that game was that LaMelo on a number of occasions didn't get back on defense, didn't cross half court, and essentially did what a lot of players at the park would call cherry picking. He didn't get back on defense to actually help his team out. He was just concerned about scoring his points. And his coach received a lot of criticism, but it also went to his father because for most people that know the Ball family, know that essentially LeVar Ball is the coach of that team just from the stands. They kind of already know that. So what that really ends up meaning is that people are assuming that LeVar Ball is co-signing this, and he did just that after the game. Because someone came up to him and said, "Oh, what about your son? He was doing a lot of cherry picking, da-da-da-da." And one of the comments that he was noted as saying is, well, if we get 92 points off cherry picking, I sure love cherries. So that just, I think, sends the wrong message because that's not something that you can get away with as a college basketball player, and it's surely not something you can get away with as an NBA player. It's a difficult situation to be in as a college basketball player who has a father who's influencing your life. It's even more difficult when you're a 15 or 16-year-old kid who's just trying to live up to your dad's expectations. So I think that my advice to LeVar is to lay off the pressure, lay out of the media, be proud of your sons, support them, but don't be so vocal about what you think of them or what you think they can be, because there is a chance that they could fail. I don't know if people have realized that, but they could. They could not become the players that you expect them to. They could get injured. And then who's going to look stupid? Not any of us, but you. So ultimately, I think that that's something that LeVar is going to have to remember. And I definitely think that that's something that he needs to be reminded of, if not from his own sons, from somebody that he would listen to. Ultimately, I think that when it comes down to the root of this problem is that this is a father who is living vicariously through his son. And that's a dangerous place to be in as a family and as a parent, because what you want for your kids may not necessarily be what they want for themselves. So I think that Lonzo, LaMelo, and LiAngelo should speak up to their father and tell them what they think, as well as letting them know, hey, Dad, we appreciate your support, we appreciate your confidence, but I think you're putting a little bit too much pressure on us, and we'd like you to be able to kind of tone it down just a little bit. That's it for my segment on Right on Cue. We'll be back with some more, and you guys stay tuned.
All right, good people, and we're back to the Quality Talk Show. It's your boy T-Word for that third segment. My boy Quentin Dame Lilly.
Last but not least,
y'all just heard a nice first dose, a little taste of the Right on Cue segment. Something new that we're doing, something new for the people. Let Q get a chance to expound on any topic that he see fit. Yes, don't forget that you guys can check me out independently as well on T's Corner. Don't forget about that. Everything is available on T's Corner on Facebook and on our SoundCloud. And Q, before we get into this next segment, what's your name on SoundCloud for the people out there so they could go ahead and get directly to the Quality Talk Show?
Well, my name on SoundCloud is actually my full name, Quentin Dame Lilly, just as you call it, ironically. You guys can search my name on there and you'll be able to find me. And if you guys have any questions, please reach out to me on social media. I'm at Right on Cue. That's WRITEON_Q. If you guys have any trouble finding that link. We'd love to be able to hear from you guys about input on things that we can talk about and different methods that we can deliver to things that you feel are most important. Because that's what we want to do. We want to supply the people with what they love and what they need. And that's what we're here to do. We are here to do that. And we're both podcasters, on-air personalities, and actual writers. So that Right on Cue, we out there pimping the pen. So Q, in this final segment, we have several different topics we want to cover. So the first one we're gonna get into is big news out of the NFL. Some major names about to be looking for new employers. Some by choice, some by fate. So one of the major names that's on this list is gonna be your boy Darrelle Revis.
Revis Island is a vacation spot these days. So this isn't a big surprise.
Disappointing.
This isn't a big surprise. Well, Father Time is undefeated.
That's true, and we have mentioned that before.
You know,
we have mentioned that before.
You're going to get to a certain point in life to where you're going to slow down. The world seems to be speeding up and you're slowing down.
Right.
And I believe that at the cornerback position, he's slowed down enough to where the Jets feel they got to move on. Now, the release won't be official for a few more days, but the fact of the matter is we know it's going to happen. But the Jets are making huge moves in terms of cutting salaries, moving players around. So it's safe to say they're probably in rebuild mode. You've got Nick Mangold. He's going to be out of the fold.
Yep.
And then the big homie, a player who I really admire, Brandon Marshall, requested to be released.
Yeah.
Wow. The Jets are really, they're hitting reset for sure. I don't know what they're going to do at quarterback.
They done unplugged the plugs. They done took the game out of the system.
Wow.
They hitting that reset, that red button on the back of your Nintendo 64.
Yeah.
That's what the Jets is doing right now. They
Wow.
they
Full
restart
system
this game.
reboot. Full system reboot. So that's real talk. So another, a couple other players going to be released. We've got Jarris Bird of the Saints.
Yep.
I've been paying close attention to that one. That's crazy. They invested so much money. He was the highest paid safety in football for a season.
Yeah.
And now 2 years later, this dude's getting shown the door. It's expected, again, much like Revis, these high paid guys who aren't performing well or just barely performing are getting shown the door. Now, I know that you mentioned to me off air that Sheldon Richardson from the Jets might be getting released as well.
I mean, it's just one of those things where I think that the NBA has been a little bit different than the NFL, and this is one of the biggest ways that they are. The NFL motto with a lot of these guys is release them a year early, not a year late. In the NBA, there's a lot of guys that get paid a lot of money late in their career for what they did for their teams early on. You can think about it like Kobe Bryant at the end of his career. You can think about it like Kevin Garnett going back to Minnesota before he retired. You can think about it like Chris Webber with some of the teams he played for late in his career with the Pistons. Or you can think about it like teams like Shaq, all of the teams he played for at the end of his career. A lot of these teams in the NBA are more willing to pay these guys a lot more money later in their career than the NFL. And I think that that's been illustrated here. I mean, we're talking about guys like Adrian Peterson. Right. We're talking about guys like Jamal Charles. Right. As well as Darrelle Revis, like you mentioned, and Brandon Marshall, and Alshon Jeffrey. That's one of the guys that's being released this year as well. And he's not even really that old. So I think that it really just comes down to is there are two things that are weighed in the NFL that I think are most important when it comes to contract negotiations. How much are we paying you, or how much are you asking for? Right. And how much production do we expect to get from you during these years?
Which is your perceived value.
Exactly. So if the team that you're signing with or negotiating with ultimately doesn't think that they're going to get a return in the exact amount of how much they're paying you, they're going to give you the door.
Yeah,
and I think that really goes to show with these players because, yeah, Darrelle Revis has some struggles this year, but I think it would be safe to say that he is still a middle-of-the-pack corner. He's still a serviceable corner. I think that he could be a contributing piece on that team. I think that he could have been a veteran presence that taught other teams how to go. But the issue that comes up...
Okay. Price tag.
How much they're paying him.
And he ain't taking no pay cut.
And that's the reason why they had to let him go.
Revis is the best legal stick-up man. That dude has held the Jets up at least twice. Legally. So you think he gonna do a team-friendly deal just to stay in New York? It's inevitable what's gonna happen to him. Perceived value versus true value. You getting roasted by second and third tier receivers. I'm not paying you top tier money and you can't lock down a number 2 dude. Yep. You know what I mean? So
no, that's definitely arguable. And I think that, that's a legitimate reason why they let him go.
It's time to move on.
The one that shocked me more than anyone else, I think, was number one, the Alshon Jeffrey. The fact that he's had his injuries over the last couple of years.
I think that's the key factor.
He's a younger dude. I mean, he's still in his late. I think he's like 27, right? And I definitely think that you can't blame all of his production issues on him. No. When your team wins 3 games, it's not the receiver's fault It's not all his fault. I mean,
agreed. But the thing about it is this, and maybe the team is doing them a solid. The Bears know they're probably going to rebuild at some, because the Jay Cutler era or experiment or whatever you want to call it has to be over. You don't have.
He's probably next to go.
You don't have a true viable. You don't have a true starting running back in me. That's no diss to Jordan Howard. But the fact is, you don't have a guy that you know, this is my bell cow back. So you're really hitting reboot on the offense anyway.
Right.
Okay, give this young guy a chance. If he has a good relationship with the front office, hey man, don't worry about it. I understand y'all making a business decision. Let me go find a home with a contender.
Right.
That's probably not what's happening. But in the perfect world, that's what you would think. Like, we know we can't win with you, so we're not going to stop you from winning without us.
Right.
Yeah. But that's probably not the scenario. But I'm hoping it is, because that means that I would have a lot of respect for the Bears organization for knowing we're not going to win anytime soon, man, and we're not going to drag you down, and you're not a piece we can build around. So we're going to go elsewhere. One other guy, and I know you got a point coming on this, we're going to throw him in the mix. Kaepernick requested his release, so he's going to be sitting on the street looking for a new job too, and that spins it to another point. But what you got for me?
No, I think the one thing that comes to my mind that I would ask in that kind of a situation is, these two receivers, when we talk about Alshon Jeffrey and Brandon Marshall, both played together in Chicago. They both were very productive during their time playing together. If you were a GM, because you're the football guy on this show, and you've had a chance to kind of look at the rosters and see which guys, because following this question, there's another person that we need to get to that might be returning to Texas, might be returning home, but we're going to have to look into that and see how that works out. Of those two guys, if you're a GM and you're looking for a receiver that is going to help you to get over that hump, are you more likely to try to sign Brandon Marshall, or are you more likely to try to sign the younger but maybe a little bit more injury-prone Alshon Jeffrey? Which way do you think you'd be leaning on that?
That's a very good question, and it's a little bit loaded because I got to approach it from two angles. If I'm maybe one veteran receiver away and my offense is already explosive, New Orleans, maybe I'll go Brandon Marshall. Maybe he's that red zone threat we've been lacking. But if I'm a team who's looking to the future and maybe I'm 2 years away, I need a receiver, maybe I'm eyeing a running back in the draft, I got a couple defensive players to pick up, maybe I'm going to get this guy. You know, maybe I'm Jacksonville, because I might go and try to get Tony Romo. I need to put a receiver back there because Hearns and Robinson was good 2 years ago, but not now. So one of those guys is going to be.
And I think a lot of that comes from offensive line, quarterback play. I think a lot of that has to do with that too, because I definitely think that those two guys by themselves showed 2 years ago on a team that wasn't very good.
Right.
That given the opportunity, they could ball.
Right. But you add Alshon Jeffrey. Yeah. And now you've got the triplets.
Right.
And you've got a legit red zone threat, because Alshon's what, 6'4"?
6'3", 225.
Okay, so that's a big dude, but he has that catch radius that makes him a red zone threat.
Right.
Those other two are not really. They're more long ball.
Right.
They're long run hitters.
Yeah. Home
run hitters. So you bring a guy in like that, you open up your offense, and now you can sit on Blake Bortles for another year. That being said, if I'm a GM, if I'm right there and I just need a couple pieces for my offense, I might go get Alshon, because I feel like his recent injury history is going to make his price point favorable to us. And I know that that's a piece that I can integrate, and I feel like he'll pick up the offense and do really well. If I'm a couple years out and I know, okay, I'm still collecting a couple other pieces, which I feel Jacksonville's on the verge. They didn't show it this year, and they were my preseason pick to almost make the playoffs. That's a team I would see Alshon going to in that type of scenario. Not saying they will, but that's kind of how I would play that.
Right. Yeah, so I think there's also some other news that's come out.
Okay.
Bleacher Report is reporting, essentially now, that rumors are stirring that Adrian Peterson is thinking about making a return to Texas to play for the Dallas Cowboys.
See?
One of the unique things about that story, I think, is that before they drafted Ezekiel Elliott 2 years ago, this same rumor came out,
they were trying to court
and they wanted him to come in.
Yeah.
This is a time in which I think that Adrian Peterson will show his true colors. What's important to you? What's more important to you? You're a running back over the age of 30.
32.
You haven't won.
Yeah.
You haven't advanced to an NFC Championship game except the 1 year, I believe a couple of years ago.
It was 8 years ago.
It was a while ago.
Yeah. They played the Saints.
You've made your money. You've had a consistent career for the most part outside of your injuries. What's most important to you? getting some more money before you hit the can, or playing for a contending team like possibly the Dallas Cowboys may be, and playing a backup role, being a leadership, being a good influence on a guy like Ezekiel Elliott, who probably could grow tremendously from that experience. I think the person that would benefit the most from that situation is not Adrian Peterson, and it's not the Cowboys. I think that Ezekiel Elliott could grow a whole lot from learning from that guy, as well as having that guy to be behind him to kind of be that I'm trying to remember. Do you remember the guy that played for the Jacksonville Jaguars when Maurice Jones-Drew was there? Was it Fred Taylor?
Was it
Fred Taylor?
Or was it Jackson?
Fred Jackson, I think, was his name. It was either Fred Jackson or Fred Taylor. Either way, he was an older running back. He had been there. He had been on that team. You know, they drafted Maurice Jones-Drew. But what was he? He was the veteran that would come in and play in small spots here or there. And I think that he was able to provide that kind of veteran leadership for that team to support Maurice Jones-Drew at that same time.
I feel that, but since we're talking about veteran, I'm going to throw a dude in the mix, and we mentioned him earlier. Another guy who'll be returning to Texas, hook him, Jamal Charles.
Right.
Now, and you and I have started this conversation.
Yeah.
So now we get to actually hash it out on the air for our listeners. Right. So the debate is this. If there's two running backs available, Adrian Peterson and Jamal Charles, and there's the opportunity to go to Dallas, if I'm Jerry Jones or Jason Garrett or whoever's in charge of personnel in Dallas, who am I going to pick? Q sounds to be somewhat entrenched in AP being that guy. I feel like it's Jamal Charles. Now, I want to counter your points that you made about AP. Here's why I don't think it's a good fit. While I do agree that veteran leadership will help Ezekiel Elliott develop and become a better back, and a guy who has a very similar skill set to him would help save him carries, because he was high on carries this year. High. So you got AP coming in now. He can pillage some of those carries. Somebody gonna get upset about that. Zeke is not gonna like it. He wants the ball, and he's gonna want it first, second, third down if he can get it. Feed me. His motto is feed me. You can't feed me if I'm sharing carries. He's not a timeshare guy at this point. Jamal Charles enters this conversation as you've got thunder and you've got lightning. You got that big rumble, which is Ezekiel Elliott. And then you got that lightning fast, which is Jamal Charles. I feel like it's a better fit scheme-wise, and from a budgetary standpoint, you're going to get Charles cheaper because he has a lot. He's missed 24 games over the last 2 seasons. So that's an average of, 12 a year?
Yeah.
So that means he's playing about 4 games a year. There's less wear and tear on the tires. And he offers something different because of those 3 players, Zeke, AD, and JC's the best receiver out of the backfield. Hands down. You add that element to Dallas offense, and they go from being, wow, these guys can run the ball and they can do this and do that. And all of a sudden, they're in the conversation with Atlanta's offense, the Raiders offense, the Patriots offense, the Broncos offense from a couple years ago, the Saints offense. Because now Dak is more comfortable. He can dump it off, but he can look downfield and he know it ain't there. Let me dump it off to JC on third down and he going to give me 6 yards for a first. In my opinion, that's why I feel that Jamal Charles would be a better fit. Now, if AD went to Dallas, I can't be a fan because I don't like the Cowboys. But I know that he will probably have the most success in his career that he's had since the Vikings went to the NFC Championship in 2010.
No doubt. And I think that your point is well taken. That Jamal Charles may very well be a better fit. But ultimately, I think what it'll come down to is that for the same reason that Jamal Charles has less tread on his tires, he's a younger player. He still has more years to play, I believe. Would Jamal Charles be willing at this point in his career to concede to being a backup at an age and at a time in his career in which he could go he could go to a team like Seattle and be the starter. He could go to a team like the Minnesota Vikings, who just let Adrian Peterson go, and be a starter. He could go to the New York Giants and be a starter. I legitimately think that no one at this point would be willing to sign AP as a starting running back for their team because of, like you said, his age, the fact that he's had some injuries, such forth and so on. So from that standpoint, I think that AP would be more willing to accept that role than than JC would when we talk about Jamal Charles.
Yeah.
But that remains to be seen because we don't really know or see these guys in that kind of a role. We've never seen any of the three guys, Ezekiel Elliott, Jamal Charles, or Adrian Peterson, in that role in which they were playing essentially behind someone else.
Right.
While I do think your point is well taken about the contrasting styles and being able to show something different, ultimately I think it remains to be seen about whether or not that offense is going to be able to be flexible enough to run some things for Jamal Charles to attribute to his skill set. Because a lot of what they did this past year was towards Ezekiel Elliott's skill set because he took the majority of those carries. If they were to be consistent with that, they'd be able to slide AP in on some of those plays, and I think that he would have somewhat of that same effectiveness. So it remains to be seen from my standpoint, but I think either one of those options, the Cowboys would be happy to have either one.
Oh, no doubt. I personally think JC's going to come cheaper, and to kind of close on that last point that you made about scheme fitting and diversifying the offense to fit what JC does, to me, I feel like you don't do what you can't do. You do what works. If I can hand it to Zeke and I can get this and get that, and I don't have a dude that I know could come in and I can throw it to him out the backfield, like let's say Darren McFadden was healthy all season last year, you would have probably seen more in the screen game because he excelled at that. And he's good on the edge and in space. That's one thing he did well the previous season. As bad as the Cowboys were, Darren McFadden was a 1,000-yard rusher. And he was a great receiver as well for them when he wasn't, a little bit nicked up. He was their lead back. I feel like Jamal Charles would perform like Run DMC on steroids. So I personally see a good fit. Obviously, we're definitely going to see it from different sides of the coin, and that's all good. That's what we're here for, to debate and discuss and go on those points. Now, one last thing we want to wrap before we get off the NFL for today is your boy Cap. Yep. So Cap requested that he be released. So when that time comes, I believe it's March 9th, free agency begins, so he'll be released that day. I believe it starts at like 3 p.m. or something like that. Also, he was talking about he's not going to kneel this year because he feels like the national conversation on the issues that he was kneeling in regards to, there's a bigger conversation. Right. Do you believe that this is contract related for him trying to make himself more marketable to the team?
I definitely think that it is. I think that it's hard pressed to put yourself in that situation and not consider your well-being first and foremost.
Right.
It's kind of like the frontline soldier who sacrifices himself for the betterment of the cause. I don't think that Kaepernick wants to continue to be that frontline soldier anymore. I don't think that he wants to crucify his career any more than he already has. I mean, he spent the last 2 years pretty much being a backup after being arguably one of the most dynamic quarterbacks in the NFL for about a 3-year period.
For 3 years, yeah.
So I think that dramatic fall kind of showed him that, you know what, some of this I need to kind of scale back on. And obviously when you hear from other GMs that they're not willing to take you because you're bringing too much political drama to their team, one has to make a decision whether or not it's worth doing at this point. A lot of people want to be critical and say, oh, well, he only did it when it was convenient for him and such and forth. But I think it's hard to put yourself in a situation in which, hey, bro, you can do what you want, but you ain't going to be making the money. You ain't going to be able to feed your family. You're not going to be able to, support your lifestyle. You're not going to be able to do the thing that you love. I think a lot of people would change their tune and change their attitude about things if they were forced to in that kind of a situation.
And he's young enough to reboot. So,
no doubt.
This is only your second team.
Yeah.
It's not wrong for you to go, okay, what's next? So I feel like this. I think here's what I don't like about it. Don't announce it. Just when you show up to the game this fall, or when you go on those interviews with teams when you're thinking about when they're courting you in free agency and they ask you behind closed doors, y'all discuss that as the public, as the fans, as the media and all that. We don't necessarily need to know until game day comes, you're signed with whoever, and you're standing during the national anthem. That would have been fine by me. I don't like the fact that there was an announcement made, and that makes me feel like it was disingenuous to a certain extent, and it was simply based on the contract. Even if it was, don't make me feel that way. Right. It's like what some people say, like, hide your racism around me. Like, I might feel like you're a racist person, but if it looks like you're making an effort to conceal it, that's fine. Do your thing. I don't have to cross the line with you. You don't have to cross the line with me. And it's the same type of thing with Kaepernick. If your goal is to, like, I want to make myself more appealing to other teams, then let me do this. So we're going to go ahead and close the chapter on that. And like we told y'all before, we give you sports and life. We're going to give you that real. And that's a real conversation because we've had this talk before about his impact on the movement that was, equality and the rights of people being stepped on at a period of time last summer when things was getting heated. So we don't shy away from those topics. We're going to bring it to you. We're going to give you that real, but we will move forward with the show. And Q, in this segment, as we talked about before, we're going to do something we're going to switch it up. We're trying to give you guys a lot of fresh content and something different. So we're going to refer to our resident basketball expert, and we're going to do what I call a spitball section. It's really simple. Our topic is who will make the Elite Eight in college basketball, and if you have a prediction, who's going to be the top seeds. Right. So I'm going to tell you the bracket, Q, and I want you to tell me the two teams you feel like will potentially make it out of the bracket. Right. So I'm getting my bracket live and loaded right now. And I'm going to give you the number 1 and 2 seed, starting with the Midwest. The 1 seed as it stands, predicted. Projection. I've got Kansas as the number 1 in the Midwest, and I've got Louisville as the number 2. Do you feel like those teams will potentially make it out of the Midwest to the Elite Eight?
I definitely think that Kansas is a lock to do so. Kansas has proven over the last 2 months that they have been one of the most consistent teams in college basketball over the last 16 to 17 years. I mean, their coach has been definitely one of the guys you can count on. Very similar to Coach K, very similar to Roy Williams, very similar to Tom Izzo, whose team is having a little bit of an issue this year. But overall, I mean, they have proven themselves to be one of the most consistent teams, I believe, this year. And I mean, it really comes down to guard play. That's what college basketball is all about. College basketball is about guard play. If you can get good guard play, then ultimately you're going to have a chance. And with Frank Mason as well as Aubrey Graham, they're definitely going to have a chance to do so. And I think that for this Midwest bracket, when you look at the other lower seeds, UCLA is a team that I think can play with Louisville. Now, obviously, like we said, all of these are just projected right now. Right. But if Louisville plays UCLA in the Sweet 16, at this point, I think I'm probably going to lean towards giving that shot to UCLA to play Kansas in that bracket's regional for that Midwest Regional Championship to go to the Final Four. Now, I don't know at this point whether or not I would pick UCLA over Kansas, but I definitely think it would be a great, tremendous game because you would have the contrasting styles. You would have the veteran leadership of Frank Mason and Aubrey Graham in the backcourt for Kansas to go up against the young guns of Lonzo Ball as well as TJ Leaf, who's been playing and been their leading scorer this year at the power forward position for UCLA. I think that those two teams are ultimately the ones that will meet up in the Midwest, and it remains to be seen at this point. But if I had to choose right now, I'd put my money on Kansas. And the reason I would do that is because they've shown consistently this year that they know how to win all kinds of games, and they defend. That is the one thing that's consistent. If you can play defense for 6 games in this 64-team tournament, you will give yourself a chance to win at the end of every single game. And UCLA has proven to be kind of inconsistent in that matter. So I would bet that Kansas in that kind of a matchup would have the advantage on defense.
Okay. Now with that, I'm not going to hold your feet to the fire on your Final Four pick. I will leave it at the Elite Eight. So you gave me UCLA and Kansas.
Yep.
Okay, so let's go down to the West bracket. And for those people following along at home, we're checking out Bracketology with Joe Lunardi.
Yep.
You can find it on ESPN, or you just do a search for Bracketology with Joe Lunardi. So you can see the projections, and he updates them daily. So some of these seedings might change. That's why we're kind of just focusing on the Elite Eight, more the top seeds. So in the West, we've got number 1 Gonzaga and also number 2 Oregon.
Yep.
Now this is pending, obviously. So if you had to pick 2 teams from the West to make it to the Elite Eight, I named the 2 top seeds. Who would you pick? You're looking at the bracket now. Who would you pick out of that bracket?
I think this is an interesting bracket because Gonzaga, I think, gets a break in this bracket. If things go as planned, I think they're in a little bit of a softer bracket. I mean, the best team that they would play before a regional final would be Florida State, who's on the downfall. I mean, Florida State hasn't played very well over their last 3 or 4 games. They had a struggling game at Duke, and obviously it's hard to play at Cameron Indoor Stadium where Duke plays. They're a team that doesn't lose very often there, but they didn't have a good showing there. And Florida State has proven to be one of the teams that struggles to shoot from the outside. Mm-hmm. They struggle to have the snipers you need to be consistent to make free throws and to hit big shots late in games from distance. Because one of the things that happens in the NCAA tournament is everybody knows what you run. So you're not going to be able to get the easy shots that you typically get in a regular season game because people will have film on you, people will have time to prepare for you, and they know what they're looking at, usually about a day or two beforehand. Right. Something that typically doesn't happen throughout the college basketball season when you're playing games every other night, such forth and so on. A lot of times you're having to play games, with minimal scouting to be able to be done. But I think in this kind of a tournament, it really comes down to shooting, and Florida State has struggled to do that. So while I think it's lucky that Gonzaga's in this bracket with some of the weaker of the teams in the tournament, because I think a team like Arizona, if Arizona was in this bracket, a team from the West that right now we have slotted in the South that we'll get to a little bit later, if Arizona was able to play in that bracket in the West, I think I would take them over Gonzaga. But if we're going to look at the bracket as it stands, I definitely think if I'm going to put my money on 2 people, I probably would end up putting my money on Oregon, who's shown to be one of the more consistent teams this year. Mm-hmm. And I think that it would be a great game between Gonzaga, but ultimately I think Gonzaga would be able to take advantage. The one thing that I think would be an issue for Gonzaga against Florida State is that they don't have a small forward. Okay. Gonzaga plays 3 guards. All of their guards are between 6'3" and 6'4". Now, while that's a great size for a guard, when you don't have a third guard that's in that 6'7" to 6'9" range, when Florida State has 3 guys that are 6'10" to 6'8", there's no one to be able to match up with those guys on the perimeter. So I think that they may be able to take advantage of one of those smaller guards. Mm-hmm. But if I had to put my money on it right now, I would say that Gonzaga is the team. But watch out for Florida State, because if they can get on track in the ACC tournament, my pick just might change on that.
All right, so to quickly recap that, we've got out of the Midwest, Q is projecting Kansas and Louisville to go to the Elite Eight.
Yep.
And then out of the West, he's kind of got a toss-up. Definitely Gonzaga's in there, but he's also looking at Oregon and possibly Florida State if they can make some noise. Yep. So those are the guys that he's looking at battling for those 2 spots in the Elite Eight. So we're going to jump over to the South, as you just previously mentioned. Right. The number 1 projected seed is going to be North Carolina. Yep. The number 2 projected seed is going to be Kentucky. Yeah. Now, another seed worth mentioning to me is Arizona.
Yes.
They're playing close to home in the first round as well.
Right. The first 2 rounds stand.
Right, the first 2 rounds. So, with that being on the table, who do you see making it out of that bracket to the Elite Eight?
I think this might have been the easiest bracket for me to choose from.
Okay.
North Carolina has proven themselves to be one of the best teams in college basketball this year. I think that them, along with Kansas, are probably the 2 most complete and consistent teams this year that has played against proven competition. I say that because while I know that Villanova is a very good team and won the national championship last year, I think it remains to be seen at this point whether or not Villanova has played enough competition to perform and do what they did last year in this year's tournament, which is in the East, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But easily, I think I'm taking North Carolina to make it to the Elite Eight in the South bracket. Mm-hmm. But a little bit of a surprise here. Kentucky, while talented, while they've been one of the stronger teams in the SEC, one of the weaker of the Power 5 conferences, if I had to put my money on it, I'm going to take Arizona. I'm going to take Arizona in that matchup if they were to see each other in the Sweet 16. And the reason why I say that is because they have a guy in Alonzo Trier who has proven himself to be one of the NCAA's best scorers. He can score on anyone. He did it to Lonzo Ball. He did it to Oregon. He did it to USC. He can do it to anybody in NCAA. He's proven himself to be a very, very consistent shooter, as well as a very, very consistent scorer, to be able to get to the free throw line, to get to the basket, to be able to get his points. And then one of the unsung heroes on Arizona this year that is just now starting to get the hype that he's looking for is Lauri Markkanen. He's a dude from Finland, a 7-foot shooter. Nice. A shooter from 7 feet. I mean, the guy's versatile. He can put the ball on the floor. He plays defense. He's one of the team's leading rebounders. And he's going to cause a lot of matchup problems for Kentucky, because Kentucky, their bigs like to stay close to the paint. Their bigs want to block shots and rebound.
Right.
And what he would allow is the lane to be a little bit more open because guys will have to respect his shooting. He's the best shooter on Arizona's team. And that's what a guy like Alonzo Trier, who is also a very good shooter in his own right. So if I'm going to pick between those teams, I'm going to take North Carolina and I'm going to take Arizona. I think that Arizona has proven themselves to be a defensive team, a defensive-minded team, and I think that Kentucky has weighed in their interest in playing defense at times this year, which is why I'm a little bit surprised that Joe Lunardi still has them ranked as a number 2 team. Maybe it's because of their conference record, but then again, I think that the Pac-12 has been a better conference in basketball than the SEC has this year, with the fact that UCLA, Oregon, and USC are all teams that are improving.
Well, like we talked about off air, you were talking about just how strong the Pac-12 was, and this is the first time in quite some time.
Yeah.
So I think that that's factoring in. And again, this is kind of early projection. Well, not really early projections, but this is projections. And these things can change, and there's still some movement that could proceed. So coming out of that bracket, we do have you've got Carolina, and you have a sneaking suspicion that Arizona will be that gunner that'll meet up with him in the Elite Eight. So
no doubt. And it's unique.
That could be a potentially good matchup.
When you look at these matchups and you look at the seeds, who these teams are, it looks like Arizona would be an upset against Kentucky. But in my mind, it's not really an upset. I mean, I think that Arizona is kind of underseeded, to be honest. If I was choosing this bracket, I think I would have had those 2 teams switched. I think that my 2 seed would have been Arizona, and my 3 seed would have been Kentucky with the way that they've played this year. But Joe Lunardi has them matched up this way. So from his perspective, that would be an upset. But I definitely think that it's possible that either one of those teams could win. If I'm going to put my money on it, I'm going to put my money on Arizona to meet North Carolina in the Elite Eight.
That's what's up. So we're going to get into the last side of the bracket, the last area. We're going to talk about the East.
Yep.
And we've got number 1 seed Villanova.
Yep.
Number 2 seed Baylor. And this side, we've got, I'm going to name 4 seeds on this side. 3 projected Duke. And this they just moved up in his rankings. And then number 4, Florida. They moved down. So he flip-flopped those 2.
Yep.
So Florida was 3 and now they're 4. Duke was number 4 and now they're 3. Potentially. This is a projection.
Right.
So looking at this one, you got Notre Dame over there. Even in my limited information that I have on all these teams, I feel like this one's loaded. It's kind of like not murderer's row. It's not that bad.
Yeah.
But I feel like whatever team comes out of this bracket, it's going to be tough on whoever they meet in the Final Four.
Sure.
Because they're going to have they'll be battle tested for sure.
No doubt.
So let me get your inside take. Go ahead.
I think that Villanova has proven themselves over the last 2 years to be a very consistent team and a dominant team in the Big East. But it is in the Big East. This isn't the Big East of old where Georgetown was great. This isn't the Big East where Syracuse was still in that conference. And this isn't the Big East in which UConn was a dominant team. I mean, UConn isn't even in this bracket. So, I mean, yes, they've proven themselves to be a very good team, but some of the better teams that they played this year are Creighton, Butler, who are all solid teams, but I don't think they match up from an athletic standpoint or from a talent standpoint with Villanova, which is why I think that them being a 1 seed was kind of overranked, although they do deserve it because, I mean, they only have 2 losses this year. So I think that they got a tough draw. I mean, it comes down to what you mentioned before, but Miami, if they're playing Miami in the 2nd round,
I was peeping them.
Miami is a very, very good team that's at this point ranked a little bit low in my opinion.
And to your point right there, if you're Villanova and you face Mount St. Mary's or Texas Southern in the 1st round, and then you meet up with like Miami or Michigan State, that disparity in talent that you're facing could sneak up on the team.
Yeah, no doubt. And I mean, for a 2nd round matchup to play Miami, Villanova is getting a tough draw, especially to be the number 1 seed in their own region. Typically a team in their own region gets a little bit of an easier walk, at least through the first couple of rounds.
The first 2 rounds.
Usually. But, I mean, they're getting right to it because you can never count out a Michigan State team that's coached by Tom Izzo.
Exactly.
You could never count them out. So if they can beat Miami and play Villanova, I would give them a decent shot to upset them.
Right.
But if they don't, I think that Miami, the team that has gone under the radar in the ACC, a team that beat Duke at home, a team that played very well against North Carolina, I think that both of those teams have a legitimate shot to be able to bring a little noise to Villanova. I would still pick them, but I think that would be a tough bracket for them. Not only that, but then you have to look at the possibility of them having to play either Notre Dame or having to play Florida.
Right.
Both of those teams are very good on defense. Both of those teams are very athletic teams, and they're both very, very smart teams. They have great coaches. So I think that Villanova's getting a tough draw. Ultimately, if I had to pick in that side of the bracket who's going to make it to that Elite Eight,
drum roll. Man,
I mean, for me, it's tough. But I think at this point, I would still choose Villanova. I think I would still choose them.
But who's your other team?
But the sleeper for me, I think ultimately is going to be Notre Dame. I think that Notre Dame could upset Florida and upset Villanova to make it to that Elite Eight, that regional final. So if we move down a little bit further, I think that this bracket continues to be difficult. There's one team on this list that is going to be overlooked, and I'm telling you they can't be. I'm telling you because I've watched them. Now, mind you, this is one of my favorite teams.
Oh, crap.
This is a team that I've loved since I was a kid, so I will say that before saying my pick. But
he's not biased.
USC is an underrated team this year.
Says the man from Cali.
They are. They
you.
are an underrated team that has proven themselves. They've beaten UCLA this year. They've beaten Oregon this year. They've played 2 very close games against Arizona. All 3 of those teams have legitimate shots to be able to make it to the Final Four.
Okay.
All 3 of those teams.
Okay.
Now, whether they do or not remains to be seen, but those are Elite 8 Final Four caliber teams. And they've beaten 2 of those 3 in conference. They might beat the 3rd one in the conference tournament this coming weekend. But I say that to say this. As an 11 seed, for Duke to have to try to play them in the 2nd round, that's a tough draw. The game that USC had against Chris Dunn in Providence last year was probably one of the best games in the college basketball tournament. It was a back-and-forth seesaw game in which ultimately USC lost, but played a fantastic game against a team that was obviously more talented. Chris Dunn was the best player in, at the point guard spot over the last, couple of months before leading up to the NBA draft.
Right.
So I definitely think that USC is going to have a chance to make some serious noise and sneak up on some people because they're only an 11 seed, and when you're a double-digit seed, people are not really going to pay you as much
they'll
attention
sleep on you.
as other teams might. Minnesota is not a team I think that's been consistent enough, so I think I would pick USC to play Duke. And really, I think when it comes to that matchup, I think it's really going to come down to whether or not Duke makes shots. Because when Duke scores, they look really good. When they don't, they look pretty bad.
They don't have what it
takes. They don't play as good on defense. They don't rebound as well. They don't communicate as much. So I think that definitely it'll really come down to who's making shots. But ultimately, I think I would choose Duke in that matchup against USC. And I think it's a safe assumption to make that Baylor is going to be able to play Duke in the regional or in the semifinal of the South or the East regional. Excuse me.
Yeah. So that would probably be Baylor, South Dakota.
Yep.
And then maybe Baylor, Arkansas?
Probably so. I think that Arkansas is a team, but Dayton is a very good team too. Dayton doesn't get a whole lot of pub, and Dayton has played very well over the last 3 years in the college basketball NCAA tournament. So, I mean, it remains to be seen, but I think if I was going to pick between Duke and Baylor in that matchup, I think, again, it's going to come down to shooting, but I'm going to take experience. I'm going to take the better coach, and I'm going to say that Duke gets an upset against Baylor. I think that Baylor's played very well this year, but I don't think that they are necessarily ready for the big stage. So I think I would take Duke in that matchup.
So in the Elite Eight, we could potentially have Villanova versus Duke or Baylor.
Right.
Or you gave me Notre Dame. No. Who was the other? You gave me Notre Dame, right?
Right.
Or was it Miami?
No, I said Miami would be a team that could possibly upset Villanova in the 2nd round. But my picks right now to make it to the Elite Eight would be Villanova and Duke from the East.
Okay.
Villanova and Duke.
Okay. So we got Q's projections in. Obviously, we're moving much closer to that part of the season becoming a real deal. And once those seedings come out, we're going to be able to say, okay, now you have it locked in. where do you stand? We'll get his insight and his expert opinion. So Q, before we wrap the show, man, as I understand it, you played in a little bit of an alumni game recently.
I did play in an alumni game.
So won't you tell the good people about how that went, man? Tell them about your balling skills. We didn't get no video, y'all. I don't know how that happened.
Photos, no videos.
But we definitely want to share with you all how my boy did. I heard you balled out, though. What's up with that?
I played pretty well.
Listen to this guy.
I've never been the person to brag on myself too much. But what I will say is that I had a great time. It's one of the great experiences to be able to have to graduate from a fantastic university that you played basketball at, and to be able to go back and bond with some of the guys, talk about some of the funny stories with Coach, talk about some of the funny trips and things that happen on the bus on the way to the games. And that's a great experience for anyone to have. Something I think that all of these college basketball players that we're mentioning that are playing in this tournament, this time goes by extremely fast.
It does.
I can remember playing in my conference tournament. I never was able to make an NCAA tournament, but playing in my conference tournament last year seemed like it was just yesterday. And now my college team is playing in their conference tournament today. Tonight they play. So, it's just one of those situations in which I hope that all of these college basketball players can cherish that moment, because all you'll have when you're done playing is an alumni game when everybody's out of shape and bringing the ball up, huffing and puffing. But I had a great experience. I'm a little bit younger than some of the guys that were out there playing, so I was able to take a little advantage of them. But
give him the stat line, bro. Give him the stat line.
So I did have 34 points. I was the leading scorer in the game. That would have been a career high if I did that in an actual college game.
How many you had at the half, though?
Well, I had 8 at the half.
Okay, so that means the second half you went off.
I had 26 points in this.
Keep it real.
So,
this guy.
I'm not. Like I said, I don't want to make this so much about what I did, because at this point now, that part of my life is behind me. But don't get it twisted. You talk a little smack, I will give you the business. But that's for another time. I don't say too much. I just go out there. And
the homie Q gonna put you in the blender. You heard it here first, folks. 32 points. You said 32, right?
34 points.
34 points. What you do on them boards, though?
I didn't even get to count my rebounds.
Oh, man.
I didn't get to count my rebounds.
We need a full stat line.
I wish somebody would have took a box score.
Hey, Coach, where you at? We need them stats, man. I need to know what he did. What he did, what he did on the glass, how many steals he got. I want to know how many dimes he dropped. I need them numbers. So if you're out there, current and former Hilltoppers, and you caught that game, I need that info. It's your boy T-Word at tscorner.info. Shoot it to me. I need to know. I need to know if you got any video or pictures, send them to me too. But again, man, that's a cool thing, man, that you got to play in that alumni game. I know that's a heck of an experience. Mine wasn't necessarily sports related, but I know just going back, and yours is a lot fresher in your memory than mine. But I did my 20-year reunion last year, 20-year high school reunion.
Wow.
And the first day, I didn't realize I wanted to go. Until I went that first day and I got to reminiscing and talking and guys I played ninth grade football with. So that goes way, way back, like 24 years. And it's just a cool experience. So with it being so fresh for you, I can imagine how much of a pleasure it was to get out there and shoot hoops and ball with the homies. So that's a real cool thing. That's a funny thing about life, man. The older you get, the more important those memories are and the less important some of the other things are. So for all the people out there, listen, we want y'all, enjoy everything. Enjoy our show. If you have to digest it in bits and pieces, listen to it 15 minutes at a time, whatever. But keep listening. Keep coming back. We're going to give you everything. We're going to give you that real and that raw. So if the people want to find you, Q, how can they get you online?
Again, last reminder, you guys can follow me online on my Twitter as well as on my Instagram at WriteOnQ, spelled WRITEON_Q. You guys can follow me there. Please send me your friend request. Send me your follow request. I will approve you. I will follow back, and I look forward to hearing from you. This show is about you guys as well as about us doing what we love. We continue to say that on this show, but we're doing this because it's what we love. We make no money from this up to this point. We are doing this because it's important to us, and it's important that we continue to talk about what's relevant in sports as well as in life.
No doubt.
Thank you guys for showing up. Thank you guys for supporting us. And we will continue to give you guys that real. We will.
That's right. And this is your boy T-Word. I'm about to sign off. You can follow me online. You can check me out at T-Word on Facebook. Also, go ahead and like that T's Corner page. Drop that like. Continue to follow so every time we post a show, you'll be the first to know. Also, you can check me out on Twitter and on Instagram. It's going to be T's. That's TEES_corner_23. T's_corner23. Go ahead and send me a request. You know, you can follow. I'll follow you back. I keep in touch with what you're doing. And I like to communicate with the people out there. So we're here for you. We want to give you all the information and insights that we have. And we want to talk to you. So when we put out topics, be sure to go ahead and comment on the post and things like that. Because we want to know how you feel about what we're talking about. So again, this has been the Quality Talk Show. The first one of March. This year is moving really fast. But we're going to keep giving you that real and that good stuff every week. Might hit you up with a double up. Just keep your ears peeled. Next week, we do have some great topics to get into. We've got a lot more NFL news. We're going to review the Combine. We're also going to talk about free agency, which should be hot and heavy at that point. And we're also going to talk about potential top picks in the NBA draft and their impact on their prospective teams. So be sure to tune in for that. This has been T-Word with my co-host Quentin Dame Lilly.
Yes, sir.
Thank y'all for tuning in. Thanks for listening to Quality Talk Show. We'll catch y'all next week. Peace.